All right, we are back. We took a short break last week. It's the middle of summer. Schedules weren't meshing, and so we had a little extra time in between shows, but do appreciate you finding us here on Wooden Sticks. We are broadcasting from the Aquarius Home Services studio and looking forward to a conversation with a very good friend of mine who I travel with each and every hockey season. He is Joe O'Donnell, radio play-by-play guy for the Minnesota Wild from Philadelphia. Just a terrific, super talented broadcaster in the NHL. And again, if you get to that spot, you're something pretty extraordinary. And he is one of the best. He fostered a relationship through over the years with Doc Emrick, and that was one of his mentors out in the East Coast. He put his time in and worked in a lot of different jobs all over the country at smaller levels, clearly. And I think his foundation to where he is now started in Houston with the Arrows and moved to Des Moines with the Iowa Wild. And he's just one of those guys. The more you get to know him, the more you respect his work ethic and the more you enjoy his company. He's got a great passion for the game of hockey. He's got great passion for the teams he loves, including the Wild. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention his beloved Philadelphia Eagles. He loves NFL football. And so that's kind of another connection that we have, because during the fall and into the winter, we will go catch a football game or two, and he's into the fantasy football just like I am, which I love. And you'll get to hear today just the work that he's put in, how he was able to matriculate from doing games at Delaware when he was a student out there with the club team to end up in the National Hockey League. It's a pretty remarkable story. I'm also looking forward to getting some of his thoughts on how the draft went in his eyes. You know, Joe's plugged into the management staff and around Bill Guerin and that crew enough, and then obviously watches the games like I do. I think you take a look at some of these college kids and some of the prospects, and you try to imagine how they will fall in line, where they will fit. And I think the Wild, by all accounts, and not just folks like us that are local broadcasters, but even on a national side, I think with Zeev Boyum, they got a real steal as they moved up in the first round. I can't wait to get Joe's thoughts on that. And then some of the moves that Bill Guerin's made. And I really want to pick his brain on some of the players that last year were either injured or just didn't have the type of years that the Wild needed. And there was a reason that the Wild fell out of the top 8 and didn't make the playoffs. So we're going to put Joe on the spot and maybe see what he thinks of some of those guys. And, you know, when I think about the Wild and where they are right now, you know, we know they're 1 year away from finally not having to talk and think about the money they're paying both Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. And that's just, again, it's a topic that comes up on a regular basis because it's fact. And when Bill Guerin and the Wild march out on night 1 next year, just like they did these last couple of years, they made the decision. So it's not like it isn't fair, but they are playing $15 million less than most teams in this league. And so that's a couple of really high-end players. And as I mentioned, Bill Guerin made the choice. So again, no one's going to feel sorry for anybody here, but that is the world that the Wild are living in. And so to get this team back in the top 8, and you look at some of the top teams in this conference right now, and I look at where Dallas is, and Colorado's always there. Vegas is a perennial power. And now it looks like Edmonton has found their groove. I think Vancouver's legit. I do, with Tocchet. And now you look at what Nashville's done here in the offseason and who they brought in. You know, there are less and less spots available. And so if you're Minnesota and you're sitting here right now, you better hope that the free agency worked in your favor. Your penalty kill is better. You better hope that your goaltending bounces back. And I think last year, specifically Philip Gustafsson, it was a step back that seemed to really put them in a tight spot. There wasn't a stretch of hockey where you felt really comfortable. There were moments of brilliance for sure, but there wasn't that long stretch that we saw a couple years ago from the Gus bus, where he basically put the team on his back. And he had the new contract. He's a young goalie. He still, I don't think, has put together enough games to say he's played 2 full seasons in this league. He's getting there. But I think goalies peak at a later age, and I think there's some upside for him. I look at Freddie Gaudreau. I look at Marcus Foligno, Marcus Johansson, those type of players. They all need to have better years. I look at Ryan Hartman, and this is a big year for Hartsey. And we know this guy's got the talent to be a 30-goal-plus scorer. He did it just a couple seasons ago. And even on an off year last year, he got to 25. So I do believe this team is a playoff team. I can't wait to hear not just Joe's thoughts on that, but just how it all shakes out. His thoughts on how it's going to happen, because I don't think it's an easy path. I think the division is better, uh, top to bottom. I think Chicago is still not a playoff team, but they're going to be a better version than what we saw last year. And I think the kid they've got, the Calder winner and Bedard, was banged up, and he was a teenager. He's going to be better. He's going to be a real problem for many, many years. And then you look at Winnipeg. Are they going to go back? Are they going to stay where they are? St. Louis kind of in that same boat. I think those are the games. If you're a fan of the Wild and you really want to see playoff hockey, those are the games that are going to be really important next year. Games against Winnipeg and St. Louis and Seattle and LA. I think there's a handful of teams that are good enough to not only make the playoffs, but do some damage when they get to the playoffs. The Wild are in that grouping, but you've got to get there. And the injuries they had last year, I've done this now, 19 years I've been covering the team, and I'd never seen a season where they had that many key injuries at key spots. And just when they'd get momentum, another player would go down. And it wasn't third and fourth line guys. It wasn't backups. It was fixtures in the lineup. Jared Spurgeon, huge loss on the blue line. Brodin had some time where he was hurt. Kaprizov, the drill. It was just time and time again, they were missing players that they absolutely needed. And that, when you add that to the money I already talked about, or they're playing $15 million short, they were never going to overcome that. And they battled and they tried to stay in that conversation as long as they could. But now you start from scratch, and you give the new head coach, John Hynes, a chance to have his team, his training camp, how he wants to run his preseason, his lineup. It's a little different when you get hired mid-season, and you've got to kind of be on the fly there and work with people that you're still getting to know. That's out the door now. He knows the staff. He's got everything where he wants it. He knows the team, been around these players. I think it's super fascinating to see how training camp and preseason are going to go from that angle. And I think Joe will have some cool insight on that as well. So we'll get to Joe O'Donnell here. We'll talk about the Wild. We'll talk about his journey, and we'll have some fun talking about the game we love so much. It's the middle of summer, as I mentioned. We're halfway home, and training camp's just a couple of months away, but there is still plenty of time to get outside and enjoy what Minnesota has to offer this time of year, specifically a place like Bay to Bay Boat Club. This is your summer home. 24 years right on Lake Minnetonka, the country club boating experience. And guess what? Even though we're in July, there's still room for you. Call them at 952-401-3880 or go to baytobayboatclub.com and get out on that water and make the most of what Minnesota has to offer here in the beautiful months of July, August, and even September. The other folks I want to talk about, and I want to thank my main man, John Schweitz, dear friend of mine, and that is, of course, the folks from the Freemasons. When you hear that, you might think of the secret handshakes or the unusual hats, and of course, those awesome pancake breakfasts. Oh, yeah. But Minnesota Masonic Charities would prefer that you think about the work they do here in our community. Places like the Masonic Cancer Center at the U of M, or the Masonic Children's Hospital, and the Masonic Home over in Bloomington. They're just a few examples of important work that Freemasons support in the state of Minnesota. As part of the largest fraternal organization in the world, Masons have consistently answered the call when it comes to charitable needs. So happy that John Schweitz and Minnesota Masonic Charities has chosen Wooden Sticks to help spread the word. Look forward to more great stuff from them throughout the summer and into the fall. When we come back here on Wooden Sticks, we will be joined by the radio voice of the Minnesota Wild, Joe O'Donnell. We are back in the Aquarius Home Services studio here on Wooden Sticks. As I spoke about in our open, very excited to have a dear friend on today. One of my travel partners with the Minnesota Wild. He is the radio voice of our favorite hockey team. Joe O'Donnell, welcome to Wooden Sticks.
For having me there, 21. Good to be on with you, my friend.
Well, let's get caught up here. Summertime, we don't have as regular a conversation on our hockey club, and we micromanage the standings, the health of the team, the direction of the team. And you and I sit in the back of the airplane and the team bus, and we break it all down day by day. We sweat it out together. I love that aspect of our travel schedule. But let's just get back to the draft. I'm really excited, specifically with what they did in the first round. But I want to get your thoughts. I haven't yet had this conversation with you. So what do you think?
I think it's outstanding to get a kid like Zeev Buium in the first round there. He seemed like a guy that the Wild were sort of surprised to get. I chatted with one of the Wild's assistant GMs, Matt Sills, just last week, and they're thrilled to get him. In
Yeah.
large part, look, the offensive numbers are eye popping, right? 50 points at the college level for a defenseman. I don't care how old the kid is, but to do it like he did as such a young player is remarkable. But it's the winning pedigree and the IQ and just like being a good hockey player, all around hockey player. I think the Wild were surprised that he sort of fell into their lap, and I think they're glad to get him. And maybe after one more year of college, you might see this kid.
Yeah, so many times when the Wild finish up a draft, we're trying to project what players that are over in Europe are going to be able to do in that transition to hockey in North America. But the beauty of this pick with Boyum is we got to watch him. We watched Denver last year during the college hockey season. We watched them in their tournament playoff at the Xcel Energy Center. We got to see them again in the Frozen Four. And I think what excites most of us that cover the team is we've watched a player like Brock Faber, who was a standout on a top-ranked Division I hockey team on the blue line, make that transition. And Faber looks like, he could be a top four defenseman, if not maybe a top pair defenseman in this league for the next 10 or 15 years. And to be honest, this kid, Zeev Boyum, might be even a little more dynamic at the college level. You mentioned it, just a freshman, 50 points, national championship. This is exciting for me to think that these two guys could be on the same blue line for what could be a decade and a half for this hockey club.
Agreed. I don't want to throw cold water on that though, Kevin, but like Carson Lambos, remember just a couple of years ago was like, wow, here's a future NHL defenseman. And then he had a rough first American Hockey League season by all accounts. Maybe some of that's not the fault of his own, right? It's circumstance. They had a rough year down there. They didn't have a lot of veteran defense to help mentor a youngster like Lambos. But I think you're right to your initial point. Like it's hard to project out at times where somebody might be a few years from now, right? You're taking some of these kids at 17, 18 years old. What do they look like at 24, 25, 26? But that firsthand account of Denver season on a couple levels there on the biggest stage to watch this kid play for Team USA on international competition. Speaking of Buium, I think that you're going to see a quicker transition, I believe, to the NHL than maybe some first round picks, maybe some prospects that just don't ever pan out. Like I fully expect this kid to be what the Wild think he's going to be. It's just so hard sometimes. You look and you're like, man, the prospect pool's so deep, and then maybe one or two guys pan out. So that's just sort of fish in a barrel with hockey and drafting. You better have a deep prospect pool like the Wild think they do, because sometimes, the 4 or 5 kids you think are can't miss, maybe two only pan out. Unfortunately, Minnesota has missed on some first and second rounders in recent memory, and it sets your franchise back a little bit. You don't get better quicker like you hope to. So I think the idea here is continue to stockpile, continue to have assets along the blue line that are prospects that you can either develop into your own organization or use as trade chips down the line. So I like what Judd Brackett, Bill Guerin, and the staff have done at the draft table last couple of years. Again, I think it's a numbers game. The more you have, the better chance you have of some of these kids hitting and eventually helping your NHL team.
The other big move we've seen here in the last couple of weeks for Bill Guerin and his staff was the signing of Yakov Trenin, a real nice, I think, grindy type of Marcus Foligno player from the Nashville Predators. What do you think of him, and how do you think he'll mesh with the roster as it's assembled right now?
I got a couple of thoughts on that. First off, I saw this kid play a bunch in Milwaukee, the American Hockey League, a number of years back. So I have a pretty good understanding of what type of player he is. I like the addition. You know, Bill Guerin has talked openly about it with the media in the last couple of weeks, really since the season ended, on how to rebuild this team, get it back to a 100-point playoff team. Some of it's going to be in-house, right? Guys need to have better seasons, and some of it's going to be we need to be harder to play against. And when you think of guys that are a pain in the rear end to play against,
Hmm.
Trenton comes to mind. His best offensive season came under John Hines in Nashville, right? John Hines now, of course, coaching him in Minnesota. Obviously, a big reason Trenton signed there, I think, is because he believes in Hines and his ability to get the most out of him as a player. I also love the Russian factor. There's an old saying in hockey. I don't know how old it is, but I remember hearing it years ago. If you have one Russian, you better have two. And the Wild didn't have that really. You know, once Kulikov moved along, and unless I'm forgetting somebody, like it's just nice, I think, to have Kaprizov have a fellow countryman alongside him. I'm sure Trenton's thrilled to play with one of the best Russian players on the planet. And I think there's just a good mix there. He's going to help the penalty kill. His defensive numbers are great. Again, I go back to that conversation I had with Matt Sells during the Wild's development camp. They're thrilled to get this guy. They really think he can be a 15 to 18 goal guy. They know how hard he is to play against. He's got size. He's a great penalty killer, which the Wild desperately need. And again, it might just be more depth on that third and fourth line. But Trenton, to me, feels like a guy that when you go through a rut, or you have a bunch of injuries in December and January, like the Wild had last season, can he be a guy that elevates and plays second line for 4 or 5 games till somebody gets healthy? I think he can. We'll see what the offensive numbers eventually turn out to be, but he's only 27. He's 6'2". He got some good playoff experience this year at the Colorado Avalanche. I think that's a bonus. To me, the more guys you can get in your locker room that have won a round, that have won 2 rounds, that have played into Memorial Day and past that in the Stanley Cup playoffs, the better. So I really like the Trenton signing. Again, maybe not the sexiest name for Wild fans, but he's still young. He's under control now for a bit, and I think there's still more to his game that I think he'll discover in Minnesota.
Yeah, the Kaprizov angle is super interesting to me because I was not overlooking the fact that one of his best buddies, Kulikov, just won a Stanley Cup in Florida.
Yeah.
And, Kaprizov, as we get to know him, and we have the last couple of years working with this team, you can see how driven he is. You know how much he wants this experience for himself. And I think the biggest worry that all Wild fans have, because we are Minnesota sports fans, and we always, in the back of our minds, are thinking about the absolute worst case scenario. So with Kaprizov having now a couple of Russians on this roster, and now we've seen, we believe, a very solid draft and some young talent like Brock Faber that's just starting to become entrenched in this roster. How worried are you, kind of being a guy that's behind the curtain, so to speak, and having these conversations in and around the Minnesota Wild? How worried are you that the next time his contract is up, he might want to look elsewhere?
Say I'm worried, Kevin, but you got to know it's a reality, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to depend on what his representation, his agent's telling him. I don't know that family's a huge factor here because, as far as I know, all of his family's in Russia. It's not like he has family in New York or Florida where that might be drawing him there. Again, I could be wrong there, but it feels like everybody, from a family standpoint, is still overseas for him. I think that the biggest thing is just they have to start to take the next steps. He's obviously taken on more of a leadership role here, has Kaprizov. His numbers are outstanding. He knows the city, the Twin Cities, and all of Minnesota. They love him, right? He's really their first bona fide superstar, not named Marian Gaborik. And I think that when you're talking about Kaprizov's trajectory, what he wants, I mean, you know it, Kevin. He wants to win. He wants to
Yep.
win bad. He's going to get paid no matter where he's playing. But I think he wants to win. He's that type of competitor. I mean, I go back to the story that Dean Evison told us. It was probably 2 seasons ago. Just Kaprizov wanted to meet with Dean, right? And Dean said he expected Kaprizov to fully come in there and be like, I need the puck more. I need more ice time. I need this or that. I need to play with different players. Instead, he was like, what can I do to help us win more? That to me tells me everything you need to know about that kid. And I think Dean was kind of caught off guard by it at the time, but to me, it's a really cool tidbit about a player that's so motivated to win, wants to do everything he can to win. I believe that he will help this franchise achieve its playoff goals down the line. They just got to make sure he's here to do it. So the quicker they can get back on track, missing the playoffs again this season, and then Kaprizov's going in the final year of his deal, like that becomes a little tricky. You don't want to be that. I don't think he wants to play a season, as a pending UFA. The Wild certainly don't want him to be in
No
that
way.
spot.
Yeah.
So I think this kid wants to win. I think he's committed to being here. I think organizationally, I can't see Bill Guerin letting him slip away. But they have to certainly have a big season for not only themselves to get back on track, the veteran players nearing the end of their career that want to win, but also the future Kaprizov, in large part, I believe, will be determined by how much they win this upcoming season and then the following year.
Okay, this is my final question on the Wild. Then we're going to get into your really cool journey to where you are now as one of only 30 radio play-by-play guys in the National Hockey League. It's a fascinating journey, and that's a big part of the reason we got you here on Wooden Sticks. But if I'm going to take all the guys last year, that whether it was injuries or they just struggled and didn't have their prototypical season, if I put all of them in a starting gate and we ran a horse race, so I'll talk about Marcus Johansson in the starting gate, Philip Gustafson. I'll put Spurgeon in there. I'll put Foligno in there. I'll put Freddie Gaudreau in there. I'll put Ryan Hartman in there. So roughly 7 guys. They're in the starting gate. They're going to run their race. This next season is that race. Which player jumps up and has the biggest rebound season of the players I just mentioned? And we hope as guys that cover the club and certainly all the fans hope that they all have bounce back seasons. That's just not the reality of it. Which one has the biggest?
Oh, you're right. I fully agree. Like as you were starting to phrase the question, I'm like, can the answer be all of them? Because you need all of them, right? They have to get back to the form that their track record shows they have. Personally, I hope Freddie Gaudreau has a bounce back season because and I know he's just such a great human.
Yes.
He had such a remarkable season the year before, from the league leading shootout goals to the career high 19 goals. Like he's probably more of a 15 goal guy, but he can be such a good player defensively on the PK, Swiss Army knife type of guy. So personally, I hope he rebounds. But I think ultimately, if you're looking at who's most important to this team winning, it's got to be Philip Gustafson. And that's not a knock on Jared Spurgeon or Marcus Foligno or Marcus Johansson, because the Wild certainly are going to need all those guys in the secondary scoring. But if Philip Gustafson rounds back into a 912, 914 save percentage guy as opposed to 899, I'm not even saying he's got to be at like 930 like he was a couple of years back, the 22-23 season. I'm saying I think the league average this year was right around top end teams are probably 910, and I think the league average was probably 905 or 900. Like if Gustafson can be in that 910, 912 range save percentage wise, the Wild are going to be a playoff team because you know what you're going to get from Flower. Yes, for Volstead, a bit of a wild card, but certainly can give you some starts this year. But if they get better goaltending, I think this team's a playoff team again. Now, I think it comes down to that. So if you're talking about who's most important to making the playoffs and getting back where they want to be, it's got to start net.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think you have all that success. You get the big contract. You have a year where you're going back to play in Sweden. And, I think for young players, the desperation factor forces them to get to a certain level. And then you get there and you reach a goal and you attain it and you're satisfied. And then you have that step back. He's still awfully young. I think goaltenders peak at a much older age than defensemen and forwards. I still think he's got a ton of upside. We know he can do it. It isn't like we haven't seen him do it. And I'm with you. If this team is going to be a playoff team, there just isn't room for error in the Western Conference. You cannot have a team goals against below average this year if you think you're going to make the top 8. And Joe, before we finish this, just thinking out loud as I'm kind of going through Gustafson and where they land, if you look at what Nashville did and bringing in 2 bona fide 40-goal scorers in Marcia Show and Stamkos, to me, I'd be floored if they didn't make the playoffs. I feel the same way about Dallas. I feel the same way about Colorado. So there's 3 in this division. And then out west, I think there's 3 out there you can probably count on now with Edmonton, Vancouver, and then the obvious choice of Vegas. So that's six that look pretty solid. So now, if you're a Wild fan, or if you're just thinking right now, okay, how did the Wild? Okay, you got two spots. I think the Wild are better than any other team we're going to bring up. But you got to beat the Winnipegs. You got to beat the St. Louis's and those type of teams to get there.
Yeah, the Kraken. You mentioned the division teams. Yeah, there's gonna be the Kings. I mean, look, you're right. There's two spots, right? If all holds true.
Yep.
Obviously injuries can derail anybody, but I'm with you. Nashville got way better. Maybe Winnipeg takes a step back. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the essentially, like, if you're picking division winners right now, all those teams are going to be lower odds. Because they're just that good on paper. So the Wild are going to have their work cut out for them. It's not going to be any easy nights. They're going to have to beat. They did a really good job last year, if you remember, beating teams that they on paper should have beat.
Yes.
It was just they didn't have a single win against the teams above them in the Central Division. Even 500 against those teams would have gotten them in the playoffs last year. So it's going to be the mindset: stronger start, harder to play against. And if this team has to grind it out, 3-2, 2-1 every night, it's a little bit of a taxing style, but we've seen John Hines coach teams like that to success. A couple years back, Nashville traded away everybody. It looked like they were mailing it in, and he kept basically an AHL team afloat there in Nashville, and gave him a chance to make the playoffs into the final weekend of the season. So I know as a coach, he can coach them up. They need to get off to a good start. They need to stay healthy. I'm not worried about Jared Spurgeon returning to form. I'm not worried about Foligno. You know what you're going to get from him night in, night out. But they need better goaltending. They need the penalty kill to improve massively, and they have to start quickly and get some secondary scoring internally. And then you never know. Maybe Liam Ogren's in the Calder Trophy conversation at year's end. Maybe Marco Rossi scores 20, 25 goals again. And all of a sudden, you got a really good young team that's just starting to scratch the surface.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's funny. We're sitting here in the middle of July, and you get pumped up for what lies ahead. I do think this team is going to bounce back and make the playoffs. It is so much more enjoyable to do all of our jobs when that's the case. Last year felt like two seasons wrapped into one for a multitude of reasons. Okay, we can all hear your passion in your answers, which I love. Anyone that's listened to the Wild on the Fan, on the Wild Radio Network, can hear your love of the game, your passion for what you do. And I think most people probably have a pretty good idea that you're from Philadelphia, the fighting silly city of Philly. But take us back to when you were just a little guy. Where did the love of hockey come from? What drew you to the game back in the day?
Great question, because my dad never played. He was a hockey fan. He was a Flyers fan, a Broad Street Bullies fan. So he was a fan of the game. We used to go to games at the Spectrum as I was a kid. Oddly enough, I didn't grow up a Flyers fan. I had this obsession with Patrick Waugh. I had a signed picture from him. My uncle was a head chef at a hotel in Philly, where the visiting teams used to stay. And he got me this signed picture of Patrick Waugh. It's still in my parents' house in my bedroom to this day. It's like black and white. I mean, it's awesome, right? So for some reason, I just became a Patrick Waugh fan. I love watching the Canadians. Then he got traded to the Avs. So I've been a lifelong hockey fan, just through the love of the game, playing roller hockey, playing NHL 94 on the Sega Genesis. I can remember watching games at a young age and trying to emulate, like most kids, what you're seeing out there in the 90s. And then at some point, I just realized, like, I was a huge fan of Sports Center as a kid. Like, I can remember getting up early just to watch the morning Sports Center, Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann days. And at some point, I just knew, like, I started playing ice hockey about 7th grade or so, like equipment, club hockey, JV, varsity. I wasn't very good. Like, I grinded out. The stats might say I was decent, but we're talking about like low level suburbs of Philadelphia hockey. I was going nowhere. So I was like, you know what, maybe I want to try this broadcasting thing. So I went to the University of Delaware, and as a freshman, I went to their orientation, like they have for all students, and they got the tables there for the different clubs and groups and sports and whatever. And I found the radio station table, and I went right up to them, and I was like, I want to call hockey games. And they were legit like, show up on Friday night. So I got on my bike and I rode to the rink that night, and I just kind of watched. I eventually took the radio station test to get like, approved to go on air. Started doing some broadcast, more color analyst stuff because I had to wait for other guys to graduate that were ahead of me. But by like junior year, I was calling games at the University of Delaware for their club hockey team, and
Hmm.
sort of the rest is history, man. I just knew that it was something I wanted to do. I thought I was pretty good at it initially, like it just came easy to me, and I loved listening to Doc Emmerich as a kid, and so many great broadcasters. To be honest, just blessed in Philadelphia. So many great broadcasters have come through there, whether it was Gene Hart, Harry Callis, the longtime Phillies broadcaster. So I love listening to games on the radio, and like I said, the whole Sports Center angle, just kind of being in sports, just seemed like a fit for me. So I know it's a long-winded answer. I was all over the map, but yeah, it started a long time ago, in large part because I couldn't skate very well.
Well, and I think young people out there, especially now with social media, they hear clips, they see highlights, and they dream of one day doing what you're doing. And it's not. I just think people need to understand that there's a process to getting to the National Hockey League. You don't just find a program at your particular college, whether it's Delaware, St. Thomas, or any college beyond throughout the states. But there, for you, that process took you to what you call the jungle. And I love when you talk about your days in the American League, and it is. I think it's referred to by anybody that's been in the league as the jungle because of the grind that it provides. But this, Joe, was kind of the foundation to you being a National Hockey League play-by-play guy. What are some of your memories from that time?
Probably even predates that. Like the ECHL taught me a lot. I got the job in Boise, Idaho, with the Idaho Steelheads, so the Double A ECHL league in March of 2005. At the time, I was collecting bills on the phone, like I was a telephone tough guy, and I was interning for a team called the Reading Royals. They're still in existence, and so I was working, helping their broadcaster for the home games. I drive up to Reading like an hour from where I lived. I'd work the game. I'd drive back. But in March of 2005, I got a call from my boss there. He's like, "Hey, the Steelheads are looking for a broadcaster. Their guy quit," which, as you know, doesn't happen much in this industry, especially mid-season. So there's like 15 games left in the 2004 2005 season, and I got on a plane to Boise, Idaho, 6 days after I got a call saying they needed somebody and they want you to finish the year. I flew out to Boise. I didn't own a suit. I'd never traveled with the team. Um, I'd done like a handful of ECHL games, just kind of filling in. Like I said, if there was a TV broadcast, I'd jump in and do radio. So I had a little bit of a demo tape, as we call it, but nothing substantial. And I finished that year in Boise. I did 3 more years. And I always kind of thought, like, if I spend 5 years in the ECHL and 5 in the American League, maybe I could be in the NHL in 10 years. It didn't work out like that. I spent damn near 15 in the American League alone, but um, Boise taught me a lot, Kevin, to be honest, because we had a great team president there, a guy by the name of Eric Trapp, who still runs the franchise. And he just taught me like the importance of doing everything. Like you got to provide value to an organization. So I was selling tickets, I was selling corporate advertising, I was helping with the PR stuff. And that just gives you a good base on like just how much you have to do if you want to make it. Yeah, it'd be nice for every kid out of college to jump right to the NHL, but that's just not the reality. You also got to get awfully lucky. Boise was a great town, like loved it there. I was fortunate to get the job then in Houston with the Arrows in 2008, Minnesota's farm team that eventually moved to Des Moines, and had to go down to Houston and spent 5 years there. Then moved with the franchise to Des Moines. Great city. We just loved it and really grew there as well. Another 8, 9 years, whatever. And then like super fortunate to just be with an organization where they had an opening. Bob Kurtz was slowing down, was looking to take a step back a little bit, and I had put in my time enough, and I guess not ruffled any feathers where they were willing to give me a chance, do a few games. Gosh, what was that? Probably like the 1920 season, something like that.
Yep.
where I kind of got like a live demo, right? I got to go on the road first 4 games of the year, work with Tom Reed, try not to screw it up, you know, and from there I started to get, a few more games the next year. The COVID season was obviously a little challenging. Did some games remotely with TR, from the bowels of XL Energy Center, and really, but it was just bide my time, keep working hard, keep trying to do the right thing. Got to know the folks in the hockey ops side pretty well for a number of years. And just again, like you just some days getting off the bus at 4 in the morning, you're wondering what you're doing with yourself after that many years. But it was just like, if I can stick with this thing, there was never any guarantee the Wild were going to just hand me the job, right? Like they could have opened it up when Bob eventually retired and had hundreds of demo tapes and resumes of very, very qualified and talented broadcasters. So I thank them for the opportunity. It was never going to be handed to me, but I just try to put myself in a spot where, I gave myself a good chance to land this job at some point, and it's been everything I could ask for.
Well, I remember getting to know you in the last 5 years when you were still in Iowa working with the Wild down there. And, I remember one game when Dan Myers and I joined you in the booth in San Jose, and I just looked at, all the details to what you did, from making sure the buses were there at the hotel and at the rink and back and forth, the food, the actual hotel reservations, the flights. Some flights were commercial, some were charter. It was a mess. And oh, by the way, you're not only the play-by-play guy, you're the engineer, you're the analyst, you're the reporter, you're doing the interview with the coach. Like, how did you balance? I got stressed just thinking about it. How did you balance all those different jobs, knowing that at the end of the day, no matter what, when you hit the air and they drop the puck, you need to be at your very best if you were going to progress and get a job at the NHL level?
And some days in the American League, if I'm being honest, and even the ECHL, you wonder who's listening. You know what I mean? Like it's parents, it's friends and family, it's the odd fan, the super fans. I know I'd hear from them on Twitter, but like there's some days where you're just like, is there anybody out there? You're there in the American League. At the minor league level, you'll do a school day game at 10:30 a.m. on a Thursday in Milwaukee. It's just a weird environment to broadcast, and you're like, is anybody tuned in right now? Like, so you have to kind of get through that part of it a little bit too, is like you're doing all this work. Yeah, you're doing it for yourself in a lot of ways too, right? Because you have pride in what you do. But I kind of learned that I had my rhythm for as far as preparation, my system, and all that stuff, and that never deviated. Like I never wanted to go on the air. I still don't, where I don't feel like I did everything on my checklist, so to speak, right? Like my daily, I'm not going on air till all this stuff is done, and I try to never ever break that. No matter how difficult it was, didn't matter if I was going on the air in 3 minutes. If I had something to finish prep wise or just make myself feel like I did everything, I'll do it, and I'll still do it to this day. But I learned that you have to, like, the broadcasting was the last part of my job ultimately. When I took over the team services stuff that you spoke of, doing all the flight logistics and the day-to-day calendar and helping book ice times and stuff for the equipment guys and the trainers and tickets for players. If trying to think of a name that you would know, but like if Matt Barkowski's parents were coming to town, they needed a hotel room, like he'd be coming to me for that. Per diem for the guys on the road. We're trading for a player. Where's he going to stay when he gets there? Helping him with a rental car, all that stuff. That was more important because ultimately that's what hockey ops cares about the most. And organizationally, the broadcast is sort of seen as like a last ditch thing. And that's not a knock. That's the reality of that job that I took on. And I was still doing corporate sales at the time as well, both trade and cash deals for the organization to generate revenue and to make things easier on the players. Like I said, hotel rooms, apartment trades, all that stuff. So to me, the broadcast had to take a back seat to that stuff, because if those things aren't handled, if the bus isn't on time because I was too busy worried about what the second intermission sounded like, what do you think matters more to the coach and the GM and the
Right.
players, right? So the broadcast stuff, like I just got into a groove where I knew what I needed to do to get ready. Once I absorbed all the team travel stuff and got a handle on that, and you start making contacts around the league, that stuff kind of goes smoothly. But there was really never a day where my phone couldn't be off. If it was at 10 p.m. on a Wednesday and the Minnesota Wild were playing, but the Iowa Wild were off, I would get a call sometimes and be like, "Hey, we need so and so in a car service, first thing in the morning." And you have to be able to answer your phone. You got to be ready to make those logistical things happen. And again, you let somebody down, you're not just letting your job kind of slip through the cracks. Like that player's got to be there to play in a game. Everything's got to go smoothly. So those are things that really, like, the details of that stuff start to take precedence over the broadcast. I just had to make sure as well that I didn't screw up that end either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And clearly there's dozens of stories you could go to, but let's stick with just one story from your time in the jungle, where whether it was a hotel situation, restaurant, locker room, something that's, I don't want to say family friendly because I don't think a lot of kids are listening to this, but within the realm of good taste. I'd love to hear one of your favorite kerfuffles from your time trying to keep all, it's like herding cats, right? Trying to keep
Yeah.
all of that together and going in the right direction. Maybe a day or a night where it didn't go quite as you planned.
Well, there was time and gosh, there's about 1,000 I could think of, and I'd like to think I did a pretty good job. But there was a time we were in San Jose, and we were staying out in Fremont, California, because it was way cheaper, right? As you guys and the
Yep.
listeners know, like you get into anywhere near San Jose, and it's $400 a night for a hotel. So we were staying off the beaten path a little bit to keep costs down in a town called Fremont. And I don't, we were just at a Marriott property, very nice place. I was running on the treadmill, and our equipment staff came in, and they're like, "Hey, they're telling us that we checked out today, that like we don't have our rooms." And I'm like, "Huh?" So I quick, like while I'm on, like literally on the treadmill, I bring up my phone, I find the contract, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I gave them the wrong dates." And they had us checking out of the hotel, and we were still supposed to play a game in San Jose, I guess the next day. That was just like a day off in between games. And so I had to scramble to try and get as many rooms back from this hotel. Of course, they got a convention in, so the lady's like, we're sold out." She was super helpful and kind, but we ended up having to switch hotels for like some of the staff, right? You always take care of the players first. So if I can keep 8 rooms, I know I can get like 16 players there, the vets, whatever. And then it was like, what sister properties do you have? Okay, there's a place a mile away. How many rooms can we get there? And that was that was on me, obviously, but a complete disaster. And trying to piece that thing together on a day off, to get a hold of equipment guys or assistant coaches, might have to switch hotels and own up to it, right? That it was on me. That was a stressful time. We got it sorted out. There was one little minor detail. Poor Freddie Shabbat, Wild goalie coach, he went out for the day. I don't know if he went to wine country or went to a beach somewhere or whatever. So he wasn't around to get his stuff out of the room. So the hotel assured me they would like pack his stuff up and bring it down so that when he returned, he could switch hotels. They took all his stuff, Gord, and they just like chucked it in a laundry basket, like one of those big rolling carts,
Yes.
and just like wheeled it down to the lobby area. So poor Freddie Shabbat comes back from a day off relaxation, and his stuff is just yard sailed in this rolling bin. I mean, it couldn't have happened to a better guy, to be honest, but
Oh,
that's
the
one
look on
quick
his
one.
face had to
Oh
be
my God,
priceless.
it was priceless. And you know what? Every I felt terrible, partially. Everybody loved it though, because
Oh,
it
of
was
course.
Freddie, and the hockey world, like that could happen
They're
to
not going to let
anybody.
that down. No way.
Yeah,
They're going to keep needling, keep going. There's
yeah.
no way they're going to let that die.
Yeah, eating grins from all around, and Freddie handled it in
Fantastic.
stride. But that was one where I screwed up and was a chaotic day. But yeah, I've got boatloads of stories like that. Just travel nightmares, buses breaking down, you name it. I feel like I've seen it at that level.
All right, well, here we go. The hat trick hot seat at the end of the show here. 3 quick questions. Get your top of the head take and maybe some details as to why. We'll start with this one. You have a night off in the NHL, and it can't be Philadelphia because I get that one. You've got family there. I've been there for that. We went for cheesesteaks last year. Your family is unbelievably cool, and it's such a special time for you when the Wild are back in Philly. So we're going to take that one off the bingo card. But any other city, a night off, what is your very favorite place to be with the green light?
Great question. I should be more prepared for this.
Well, there's a lot of good
Um,
choices.
I know there's so many good choices. I mean, Nashville and Vegas jump out, but they are also their own breed, right? And
They're also
if
Joe
I,
Public.
yeah, if I have an unlimited budget, so to speak,
Yeah.
I think a spot like Nashville, where you could just tear Broadway apart,
Yep.
is really fun. And I hadn't been to Nashville before getting to the NHL, so that was really cool for me, especially the first time that I went there. Man, anywhere in Canada, I always tend to enjoy. We've had a lot of fun in Chicago, as you know.
Yes.
Um, yeah, but see, and you guys give me a hard time about this, Gorg, but because I've been in mostly the minors for so long, I've just crossed paths with a lot of people that have now made their way to the
You have
NHL.
somebody in every single city, dude.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why, like, sometimes it's like, even for me, just going to Winnipeg, you guys hate Winnipeg, but
Oh,
like, I got a buddy there, so Winnipeg to me is great. So, so it kind of also depends too. It's like who's in town, who do I get to see?
good
Um,
point.
but you know me, I always like to make time for those that either cross paths with or worked with, and I just think that's important to keep in touch with folks that you've known over the years.
I know you pretty well, and I kind of figured those would be some of your answers. This one I don't know. And take the X out of the equation. So it can't be St. Paul. Your favorite rink to sit down and call a game from? I don't know the answer to this question, and I'm fascinated by the why to this answer for you.
I think it's L.A. L.A.
Wow, I
just has
never would have guessed that.
LA
Wow.
has a great perch in large part because Bob Miller, their longtime ex-broadcaster, made sure he was involved in the details there. You know, a lot of times the TV crew gets put, folks might not know this, at a lower spot, and the radio guys are way up top in the old
Yep.
press box. So that can also, like, Edmonton is atrocious for us from a broadcast standpoint. The arena spectacular, the atmosphere is second to none, but like it's like seeing ants down there on the ice. I also enjoy Detroit a lot
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of reasons, including the spread there, the
Spread. Oh, they got a
pregame meal,
great
as you know,
spread.
as you would call it, the mess hall.
Yes.
But Detroit also has a great setup. Like, all I look for in a booth is good sight line, the ability to like space out a little bit, so I'm not sitting on top or next to Tom Reed. The engineer's not encroaching on us, and I just want an engineer that's able to navigate things where I don't have any issues with how it's sounding in my headphones, because you have a certain way you want to hear it, right? Like ice
Mm-hmm.
sounds, PA mics are all dialed in, like all that stuff to me. If there's a good mix, good engineer, good sight line, and we got room to work, you can put me on Mars to call a game, dude, and I'd be just fine.
I love it. Okay, final one for that to complete the hat trick. And this one will be off the hockey topic. And I don't know the answer to this one either. The very first concert that Joe O'Donnell attended. Where was the concert and who did you see?
I'm pretty sure it was a festival in Camden, New Jersey in
Mm,
like around 95 or so.
uh-oh.
There were a bunch of them at the time. It was like the old original Lollapalooza. There was a radio station out in Philly, an alternative station called Y100. They used to do the Y100 festival.
Hmm.
There was another station out there, WDRE. I saw the WDRE Fest. I think they were all Camden at the time. They just opened up an amphitheater out there with a lawn and seats and stuff. And I saw a bunch of shows there, like middle of high school, late high school years.
So give me an
And that,
example of some of the music. Like who would you have gone to see in the mid 90s?
well, I'm a huge 311 fan, and I started seeing them about 95, 96. And I've seen them probably damn near 70 times
Wow.
over the years. But like it would be Green Day,
Yes.
311, no doubt. I definitely saw when I was working for Y100, oddly enough, as a marketing promo kid back in 15, 16 years old. So some of those shows, it would be like the alternative bands of the 90s, a couple of small stages and then the main stage, and you just go for 8 hours of music. Those were really impressionable for me at the time, and I'm a big music fan. I love live music. So those were some cool memories for sure.
Great stuff. All right, before we go, just you've got 3 boys. I know you've been running all summer. How are the guys, and how was your 4th of July?
It was awesome. We went back down to Iowa actually, saw some friends there, drank a bunch of Busch Lights, as I'm sure you're aware, watched them blow up a bunch of fireworks in the neighborhood we used to live in. The kids are doing well. They are wrapping up youth baseball state tournament season. And in about 10 days from now, we will head out back east, get some time in Philly and the Jersey Shore. I will try to eat as many cheesesteaks as possible.
Oh, the best.
We'll get a couple weeks out there at the beach with the kids and then pack up, drive back to the state of hockey, and all of a sudden it'll be back to school for them. That sounds crazy to me to think we're like 5-6 weeks from school, but it's a reality for the 3 knuckleheads here, and they've had a good summer so far, playing a lot of sports and having a lot of fun. It's been great.
All right, and before we say goodbye, just everybody's got a podcast. We want to pump up yours. Where can fans find your work?
So it's called One on One with Joe O'Donnell. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. There's a Kevin Gorg episode from maybe 4 months ago. I just did one with Matt Sells, one of the Wild assistant GMs. So One on One with Joe O'Donnell. Drop it a like, drop it a listen. I'd appreciate it. But I got to go back real quick, Kevin. The start of the conversation, you asked me how I was doing, and I called you 21. And nobody listening might know why that is, but Gorgamatic 21 on Twitter, right? I mean, that's your handle.
I'm obsessed with the number. That's for
You
sure.
are obsessed with the number, so I never call you Kevin or Gorg. I usually just call you 21. And and just so you guys know, we talked about us traveling together on the airplane. I had Kevin Gorg listen to some 21 Savage and Drake on a flight this year. Not his cup of tea, but out of respect for the number 21, he gave it a listen. And that was some absolute comedic gold, that flight, watching you read the lyrics to 21 Savage and Drake songs and bobbing your head. So thanks for being a good soldier there.
That song has kind of grown on me. And so once in
know,
a
it should
while, when
be.
I'm walking into work out at the Palatial Pony Palace known as Canterbury Park, I'll pop on my Spotify and my headphones, and that'll pump me up for a day at the track. And I do love the opening part of that song. It gets off the rails after the opening 21, 21, 21, and then it gets a little filthy, but again, it's good fun. And I love that there is a song that incorporates the number I'm obsessed with. And I have thoroughly enjoyed, Joe, our conversation today. So thanks for joining us on Wooden Sticks. And I can't wait to get back on the beat with you this year with the Minnesota Wild.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Enjoy the rest of the summer, and let's grab a cheesesteak here very soon.
Can't wait to do that. That's Joe O'Donnell, radio play-by-play voice of your Minnesota Wild. A quick break, and we're back to close the show here on the Talk North Pod Network. And we're back here in the Aquarius Home Services studio, and that was a fun conversation. Boy, the thing I enjoy most about doing this show, and people always, why'd you, the name Wooden Sticks, what's that all about? Well, most of the people that we have on this show came to the hockey decades ago and fell in love with the game like I did. And most of us that are of a certain age played with wooden sticks. And I think of Joe starting hockey as a 7th grader. So he got a late start. Again, Minnesota and Philadelphia are worlds apart when it comes to youth hockey and the opportunities that kids might have. And yes, the Flyers have been a phenomenal organization going back to when I was just a kid. And I remember the Broad Street Bullies and Bobby Clark and Bill Barber and Bernie Parent and all that good stuff. But, Joe made the point that, he quickly realized that if he was going to stay involved in a game like hockey, which he had so much passion for, he wasn't going to be doing it on the ice. He was likely going to be doing it in front of a microphone. And so to hear his stories and to go back to where it all began and, going out to Idaho and making the trips to parts unknown throughout the country to get his craft perfected, to do all the different jobs you have to do to put yourself in a position to one day get the big break. And the timing worked out pretty well because, as he mentioned, Bob Kurtz, legendary broadcaster, an all-time great, and from day one, a part of the broadcast team with this Minnesota Wild outfit. And so when Joe finally got to the top of the mountain before you get to the National Hockey League, doing all the different things he did in Iowa, from travel to food to hotels to everything, along with being the play-by-play guy, the engineer, the analyst, and the reporter guy, talking to the coaches and the players before and after the game. He did a pretty damn good job on the radio. And when that opportunity came to him, he made the most of it. And he's really, really good. I love listening, because of social media now, you get to hear back some of the highlights from the radio broadcast, because most nights I'm right there working with him. There are occasionally nationally televised games, and I make a point if I'm around town and running some errands to turn the radio on and get a taste of their broadcast, because I love so much and think he does such an awesome job. But you get to hear through social media some of the great goal calls. And I just think you can feel the energy that he brings every single night, because he loves it so much. And that's what I respect the most. He's a real pro. And I watch him do the prep work. I mean, this guy puts in hours upon hours in every single situation, every game, all 82. He's ready to roll because of the stuff he does behind the scenes. And so just a great dude. And I think that came out today along the way in the show, and really looking forward to getting back on the road with Joe, because he's one of my travel partners, and we'll catch dinner, we'll catch some football. Once in a while I'll take him to the movie theater, but normally he's the guy that says he'd love to come, but he's headed to the bar, and I get that. He's a lot younger than I am. But Joe O'Donnell today on Wooden Sticks, and more great shows to come. Really appreciate you listening. If you've got any questions about maybe some recommendations, who you want to hear from, not just this summer, but into the hockey season, ping me on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Gorgamatic21. And of course, if you want to be a part of the show, or if you've got somebody that wants to amplify their business and really pump things up around here, Karen Cleary can get that done, folks. K Cleary at talknorth.com. KCLEARY at talknorth.com. You can be right here with us on Wooden Sticks. I'm Kevin Gorg. We want to thank Joe O'Donnell for his great work. And thank you, the listener, for tuning in. You found Wooden Sticks right here on the Talk North Podcast Network.